Good day and welcome to Psych Sense, where we make sense of mental health. I'm Ken Mallon, your host, and today we're talking about complex PTSD. Now, most people have heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, but many people have not heard of complex PTSD, so I want to spend some time explaining the difference. First, let's start with PTSD. The diagnostic criteria for PTSD are extensive, and they fill 3.5 pages of the DSM-5, so I won't bore you with the details, but it's useful to know the 5 main criteria. The first one is exposure. You have to have been either directly or indirectly exposed to threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. So this could either have happened to you or you could have witnessed it. The definition also incorporates situations like first responders, police officers, or others that arrive at scenes after devastation has occurred, so they haven't directly experienced it and they haven't witnessed it, but they might experience, for example, the physical remains or horrific direct reports of people that did witness it. And so that would also qualify. The second criteria is about intrusive thoughts. Now, we always hear this term intrusive in psychology, and it basically means unwanted. For example, you could be at a grocery store and you see, hear, or even smell something that reminds you of your trauma. And thoughts of your trauma will then enter your head and you can't get rid of them. It's intrusive. It's an unwanted intrusion into your mind. You're just trying to go grocery shopping and all of a sudden you get reminded of your trauma. Now, the third thing is avoidance. An example here might be you refuse to go to a pool or to the beach. Maybe you witnessed a friend who drowned when you were young, and now you just avoid that because you don't want to feel those pain and that emotion reoccurring. The fourth criteria is changes in thinking. Now, this one is kind of tough to summarize quickly because it includes a lot of different kinds of things, but it could include things like blocking out memories, could include blaming yourself, deep feelings of guilt, or maybe you just have certain feelings like nobody can be trusted. And finally, the fifth thing is reactivity. What this basically refers to is what you might call jumpiness. Now, we all get startled from time to time, but someone with PTSD will have an exaggerated startle reflex, and they often have what we call hypervigilance. This is where they're always kind of looking around for dangers. So that's PTSD. It's estimated in the US about 3 to 4% of people get diagnosed with PTSD, and your chances of having PTSD in your lifetime is around 9%. Now, PTSD, as I mentioned, is a diagnosis in the DSM-5. Now, how about complex PTSD? Well, complex PTSD is not in the DSM-5, so it's not an official diagnosis in the United States, but I can tell you what their supporters proposed and why the decision was made to not include it. Now, the proponents of a new diagnosis called complex PTSD, they felt that PTSD, as traumatic and horrific as it is, typically involves a single exposure to trauma. Now, it can certainly include multiple exposures, but their argument was that it typically involves a single exposure. This may be maybe you watched a family die, maybe you got injured in combat, you got shot, maybe you were raped or experienced a rape, maybe you were a victim of violent crime, etc. Now, they wanted a separate definition for people who experience repeated trauma over a long period of time. These could be people who experience multiple live combat scenarios at war. Maybe they were a prisoner of war and they were held for a long period of time. These could be people who had been forced into the sex trade, and it could also be those that are experiencing, let's say, long-term domestic violence, repeated physical abuse, or repeated sexual abuse. And indeed, people experiencing long-term or repeated trauma, they do have extra symptoms that go beyond the normal official criteria for PTSD. And some of these symptoms may include the following. One of them that is part of the definition for complex PTSD is emotional regulation issues. So these are people who have trouble controlling and regulating their emotions. They might have explosive anger, they could have suicidal thoughts, they could be extremely sensitive and defensive, and so that's issues with emotional regulation. The second one actually affects consciousness. It includes forgetting traumatic events, reliving traumatic events, or having episodes in which one feels detached from their mental processes or their bodies. This is what we call disassociation. So you might feel like you're not within yourself, or you're sort of watching the scene from above. And blackouts are the other common thing. The other one is problems with self-perception. People with complex PTSD can experience helplessness, they can have shame, they can have feelings of embarrassment, stigma. They feel that they're kind of different from other people, and so this can really affect them negatively. We also have distorted perceptions of the perpetrator. So this could be someone who's held against their will for a long period of time, or maybe is a prisoner of war, or is experiencing long-term physical abuse and domestic violence. Sometimes these people actually defend the perpetrator. And other times they may have extreme anger and feelings of revenge. So they have these distorted perceptions of the perpetrator. Finally, I'll just say they often have problems with relations with others. You can imagine they may distrust other people. They may have feelings of isolation. They might not want to be around other people. Now, the decision to include or not include complex PTSD in the DSM-5 was hotly debated. But in the end, it was decided not to include it for a number of reasons. I won't go into all of them, but one reason simply is that 92% of people with complex PTSD also meet the criteria for PTSD. So there's not much use for an additional diagnosis just to capture another 8%. The other reason is that if you do want to capture them, they may qualify for other diagnoses. And so they can simply be diagnosed with PTSD and something else. Something else could be they may have dissociative disorder. They may have major depressive disorder. They may have anxiety disorder. So that's a 6 or 7 minute summary of PTSD and complex PTSD. I hope it was helpful. Thank you for watching Psych Sense, where we make sense of mental health. I'm Ken Mallon, your host, and I'll see you next time.